So I'm Ron Boisvert. I'm chief of the Applied and Computational Mathematics Division in the Information Technology Lab. I'm very pleased today to be able to introduce our speaker, Professor Michael Lesk from Rutgers University. Michael has both an undergraduate degree and a doctorate from Harvard University. His PhD is in chemical physics, so he should feel right at home here at NIST, where a lot of chemical physics is happening. But he's most well known for his impressive work in the field of information storage and retrieval. Michael is really a true pioneer in this area. In the 1960s, when some of us were toddlers, he worked with Gerald Salton, a leading computer scientist of the time, on some of the first text retrieval experiments. He worked in particular on developing something called the SMART system. SMART stood for System for the Manipulation and Retrieval of Text, which was the most advanced information retrieval system in the world for a number of years. This work led to many supporting technologies that are responsible for the way we locate and interact with information online today. Continuing in his pioneering ways, Michael worked on the original Unix project at Bell Labs in the 1970s, writing some of the earliest word processing utilities and networking utilities. He also made significant contributions to the C programming languages and its environment, which a lot of us have used over the years. In the 80s and 90s, Michael worked on a variety of information retrieval technologies, including geographic information systems long before we had Google Maps, and online dictionaries. And he put his background in chemical physics to good use, working with the American Chemical Society and the Chemical Abstract Service on a digital library for chemistry. Due to his expertise in these technologies, Michael was called on by the National Science Foundation in 1988 to head their Division of Information and Intelligence Systems. And during the next 4 years, Michael worked with the NSF and its partners, including DARPA, the National Library of Medicine, the Library of Congress, and the National Archives, to distribute some $55 million in Phase 2 of the Foundation's groundbreaking Digital Libraries Initiative. That effort spurred the development of digital library technologies in a really wide variety of fields. Today, Michael is a professor of library and information science at Rutgers University, where he continues to pass on his vast knowledge to the next generation. In fact, we have one of Michael's former PhD students on our own staff in ITL, Judith Gartner, sitting down here in the front. She worked on intelligent information retrieval for maps. So in recognition for his impressive accomplishments, Michael was elected Fellow of the National Academy of Engineering in 2005. And he's also a Fellow of the Association for Computing Machinery, or ACM, which is the world's largest professional society in the computing field. I know Michael through our interactions in the ACM Publications Board, where he currently leads a task force on data, software, and reproducibility. And this is, in fact, the general topic of Michael's lecture here today. Exploitation of large quantities of digital data, which are now available to us, represent what renowned computer scientist Jim Gray called the fourth paradigm of science. That is data-intensive scientific discovery. What are the opportunities that this brings? People are quite excited about the opportunities, but there are also our dangers. So what could those possibly be? And our speaker today will really share his views on this important topic with you. So please join me in welcoming Professor Michael Lesk.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, I'm very glad to be here. Being a detail freak, Ron, don't say ACM is the largest computer society if there's anybody from IEEE in the room. Okay.
I have the data.
Okay. This talk is going to be a very, sorry. This talk is going to be a strange arc. I'm going to start off with a lot of problems, and then I hope I'm going to end with an optimistic view. Basically, there have been a lot of stories lately about scientific results that don't replicate. It's not a new problem. Charles Babbage talked about it. Now I'm going to skip over this because Ron already mentioned it, but I'll use the example I put on the post. I give students this pair of facts, and I tell them to read the paper about the cats. And it doesn't go very well. The students, virtually all of them, come up with a story about petting a cat relaxes you, relaxation lowers your blood pressure, that reduces the risk of heart attacks. And then I say to the students, no, read the paper. They looked at present or prior, choice of 2, ownership of cats or dogs, choice of 2, 4 different medical conditions, fatal or non-fatal, 32 possibilities. You shouldn't be surprised that one of them is significant at the 0.05 level. One of my friends who is a statistician looked at the paper and said, you should warn the students that it's very suspicious that present ownership is not correlated and prior ownership is, and it's very suspicious that non-fatal events are not correlated and fatal events are. So we try to teach the students a little about statistics. However, people other than students make mistakes like this. I mean, obviously the paper got published. This was a very distressing result. 2 Amgen scientists with the resources of a big pharmaceutical company tried to replicate 53 important oncology studies. They could only replicate 6, and they spent a lot of effort on it. They would send people to visit the lab where the work had been done. And you know, what this means is that an awful lot of follow-up work is simply being wasted because the original paper is no good. I was also upset that the typical comment in Nature when people wrote into the editor was, they didn't say which papers were bad. And the answer to which was, we had to promise confidentiality to get access. This is not an isolated event. There have been a couple of attempts to replicate psychology papers. Those are usually easier studies. And well, one of them was sort of a disaster, and another one was fairly successful. So I don't know whether this is a recursive replication failure, but something like that. Economics is even worse. Here's a 10-year-old study and a current study about the inability to replicate economic studies. This one actually matters. In 2010, 2 Harvard economists published a paper arguing that economic growth would basically stop in any country whose national debt exceeded 90% of the GDP. After 2 years of asking, some UMass researchers got the spreadsheet from Reinhardt and Rogoff and discovered a variety of mistakes. This paper had a real impact on many European countries, which said, okay, we've got to go for austerity. And turns out, well, the data wasn't justified. Now, to put this on a higher level, this is a Stanford doctor named John Ioannidis. And he published an article with the title, Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. And if you read the article, it will tell you that if you look at the number of people doing experiments and the significance criteria, you would expect that most of the answers aren't valid, that they're just, if 100 people toss a coin 6 times, more than one of them will have it come up heads each time. And he pointed out the real problem that the hottest areas where people are rushing fastest into prints are the most vulnerable. Now, I care a lot about this because there is a lot of political attack on science at the moment. NSF has been carrying on a war for the last few years about how much people in Congress should be allowed to see of the NSF internal paperwork. And if science doesn't have its own house clean, it's hard to object to other people. Now, one problem that doesn't affect us so much is plagiarism. We have a lot of it. Paul Ginsparg, who runs, how many people know ARXIV? Okay, so Paul Ginsparg, who runs it, has done a study and reported in PNAS that in some countries, more than 10% of what comes in is plagiarized. I said to him, well, why don't you change the process so that when we get a plagiarized submission, we don't just tell the author that we're rejecting it for plagiarism, we send a copy to their dean. And he said, in the countries this is coming from, nobody would care. Another interesting phenomenon is there are chatterbots that will spew out scientific sounding verbiage. There's one at MIT called SCIGen. And somebody ran a conference with about half a dozen papers from it. And there's a sample sentence from one of the abstracts, although IEEE, fortunately, is cleaning these papers out of its database. So that particular one isn't there anymore. But again, the practicalities here. I know about this because I was reviewing an article for ASIST, and the article was, we trained a machine learning program on the output of SCIGen, and then we went looking for papers that came from it. And they included in the submission 70 papers that had come from this chatterbot. And I said to the editor, well, the paper's important and it should be published, but ethically, don't you think you should give the authors a chance to say anything they can in their defense? And the result of that was a threat of a lawsuit, so the paper didn't appear. Well, what's going on? Well, the incentives are extreme. You can get more than a year's salary from some Asian universities if you get a paper into Science or Nature, and they and Lancet and PNAS get drowned. Even in my university, Rutgers, we had a provost at one point who had an H-index calculator on his cell phone and would use it constantly. It didn't do any good to point out that Évariste Galois had an H-index of 2. It may help that 3 Spanish researchers managed to get a bump on their own H-index by creating a fake author, putting half a dozen fake papers in their university repository, which cited their work a lot of times. For the bicycle racers, the name of the fake author was Marco Alberto Pantini Contador. So what do we actually want to do about this? And at this point, I'm going to try to turn optimist and say, look, the answer is some kind of open access, because then other people can see what's been done, and if there really is no basis to the work, it can be found relatively easily. Also, open access will help scientists collaborate. In 2009, the National Academies created a board on research data and information. And I was the first chair, and Fran Berman, I think, is the current chair. But the idea was to encourage open access and initiatives like the NSF initiative of saying that if you collect data in your research, you have to provide a management plan by which it will make available to others. Here's an example which is actually local. For a long time, NIST has run a contest called TREC, the Text Retrieval Evaluation Conference. And it has provided collections that have been used for research and information retrieval throughout the country and the world. And by contrast, work on dictionaries is impeded because they all belong to somebody. So in 1986, people started using dictionary analysis to do sense disambiguation. I wrote a paper in 86 on how to tell a pine cone from an ice cream cone. And the Canadian minister who opened the conference where the paper was being presented said he had been glad to see it because it was the only paper in the conference whose title he could understand. Now, the problem was there were a number of us, and we each had our own bargain with a different dictionary maker. So I was using the Oxford Advanced Learners, other people were using Longmans, other people using Collins. The late Robert Walensky wanted to do a comparison. He was going to take a batch of students and have each pair of students test one of the methods, but he couldn't license the dictionaries. And so we got nowhere. And I don't know whether this is the reason or not, but sense disambiguation really hasn't been a hot topic for a long time. I know there's a more obvious answer, which is what you get for sense disambiguation is more precise retrieval, and what everybody wants is simply more answers. They don't really care that much how good they are. So maybe it's not as important, but this is another thing, which is it's hard to get the data to do the work. The most successful data sharers are the astronomers who work with the virtual observatory. There's a set of accidental reasons for this. There aren't that many astronomers. Their field has no commercial value. I'm going to say later, on the other hand, high energy physics also has no commercial value, and nobody in that field will tell anybody anything. A lot of it is the individuals. Jim Gray, who not only was a Turing Award winner and knew how to make databases, but he had Microsoft's money behind him. And Alex Saleh, an astronomer from Johns Hopkins, who's really very good at both astronomy and data analysis. And he's involved in a variety of interesting data projects. For example, his wife has soil humidity sensors buried all over the Johns Hopkins campus to try to understand soil microflora. Although one of the things she finds out is when the squirrels dig up her sensors. Well, you know, you're a squirrel. You see somebody's been digging. You don't know why, but maybe it's an acorn. So you see someone else has been digging, you dig it up. All right. NIST actually has an open data strategy. This is copied directly from your webpage. And the point is, okay, we want public access to the results so they can be used by other people. And as I look at it, we want best practices for peer review of publications and data. We also want preservation, which is a big problem. And then, of course, NIST specifically wants NIST results to be used. This is a general thing for all scientific results. I talk about preserving. This is a real problem. We don't actually have a well-rewarded profession of curating digital data because basically society rewards somebody who does something new, not somebody who discovers that it doesn't need to be done because it's already been done. There was a wonderful paragraph in a British Library strategic plan about 25 years ago saying that the British Library did access and preservation. They did access for today's users, they did preservation for tomorrow's users, but only today's users paid the bills. It took a lot more time to say that. Okay, what are some of the projects? This picture is the IRIS seismic monitor, reporting all the seismic events in the world. And by the way, although this is in some ways a triumph of international sharing, India does not participate. I don't know why, but the best I can come up with is they think that if Pakistan doesn't know where their seismographs are, it'll inhibit underground nuclear testing. I don't know whether that's true, but it doesn't matter. It only matters whether the Pakistanis think it's true. Here are some particularly horrible examples. The high-res video of the moon landing is gone. There was a high-resolution signal brought down from the moon. It was downsampled to NTSC for broadcast. We have millions of copies of the broadcast. We don't have the high-res version. NASA has spent a lot of effort on this, to the extent of finding somebody in Australia who had made a Super 8 recording of a monitor displaying the signal, and they've recovered that, but it's gone. And believe it or not, was not the first time. This is the audio recording of the first moon landing, which got lost and was found in Houston. In fairness to NASA, part of what was going on was that magnetic tape was more expensive in those days, so they reused it a lot. Here's one of my favorite examples of sharing original data. So you probably all know something about Alexander Fleming in St. Mary's Hospital, Paddington, not going on vacation, without bothering to wash up the petri dishes he had left out in his lab, leaving his door open, not the window, the door. Some molds blew in, landed on the petri dishes, and as he was about to wash up, he noticed that some of the bacteria had been killed. Now, Fleming wrote a paper about this, but he wasn't either an expert on molds or a biochemist. And so on the one hand, he misidentified the actual mold. And the mold he found had 10 to 100 times the activity of a random penicillin mold growing, in this case, the top picture, on an orange, which is turned moldy. If he had actually, people had tried the species he said he was using, they probably would have seen no activity and given up. But the other thing was he wasn't a biochemist. He understood that the next thing to do was to isolate the individual chemical from the various things the mold was making to find out what it was. And he didn't know how to do that. And he sent samples of the mold to various friends, hoping that one of them would have the time and the skill to do that isolation. And nobody did, but the people at Oxford didn't bother to throw out the sample he sent them. 10 years later, when the Oxford people actually thought Fleming had died, Ernest Chain and Howard Florey decided to put aside, the war was coming, they decided to put aside their normal research in favor of helping with the war effort. They knew that curing infections would be a big deal. Chain went off to the library looking for any paper about something that killed bacteria. He came back with 3, and the second one was Fleming's, and he was chatting about it in the tea room, and someone said, "Oh, I have that mold." And that's why we have penicillin. Someone had noticed its antibacterial activity in France in 1895, but the man who did it didn't publish the result, and he died young in the First World War, so it was just forgotten. Okay, so it's important to share data. That one example is worth more than everything the government has spent on research since. Now, there's huge amounts of data. In fact, now, you might rationally ask me, so we've got this exploding amount of data. Why does the paragraph on NOAA cut off in 2004? And the answer is NOAA has reorganized. They have something like 165 data centers, and I couldn't find the summary number. So here's another strange data availability thing, looking, what can you find? This is Bridgeport, Connecticut, East Bridgeport. If you know anything about Bridgeport, this is the river. This is an industrial district east of the center of the city in wait a minute. The very top picture on the left, 1934. Should have thought about a pointer. If you look in this area, you'll see factories, and in that area, you'll see some old structures. Then, in the 65, some of the factories are gone, and the structures have been replaced with, basically public housing products. 1985, even more of the factories are gone. 1991, all the factories are gone, and the housing has been knocked out. But then in 2009, someone started to build single-family homes in the same place. So this is only possible because people, like in this case, the Connecticut Department of Agriculture, put the aerial photographs of their state online. So I'm big on sharing data. I have to recognize that one of the hard problems is the social problem. It's persuading people that this is something that needs to be done, that sort of digging in the basement is perhaps more effective than trying to get new data. It's easiest, by the way, in areas like meteorology, where making good climate models depends desperately on any information we can get about past climate. And people will do all sorts of things, like going through samples of fish that were caught 100 years ago to see what you can learn about isotope ratios. Okay, there's a big ethics and economic problem. A lot of scientists are very jealous of their data. There were a lot of people who were very hesitant about the NSF data management plans or the equivalent ones at NIH. Some areas have quite harsh standards. The Protein Data Bank for decades has worked with the scientific journals in the area to say that if you publish a paper about measuring a protein structure, you have to deposit the data publicly. Astronomy works on a basis if you get 1 or 2 years exclusive use, then you have to make it public. And high energy physics, nobody will tell anybody anything. And yet, if you look at this, molecular biology is actually of immense commercial value. In fact, the Protein Data Bank regularly sees a sudden rush of 1,000 structures get deposited because some drug company has been doing something in secret and finally given up on it. Astronomy has no value, and yet the astronomers share better. Okay. There are a lot of people who think that the answer is somehow to privatize this. Actually, let me do the example first. Landsat. In the 1970s, the Landsat imagery was sold for reproduction cost, which was fairly low. In '83, they privatized Landsat and turned it over to a subsidiary of Hughes. And the prices went up by a factor of 10. And the result was that the amount of Landsat imagery greatly decreased because nobody was buying it. Then the French put up a competitive satellite, and the prices dropped a bit. And then in 1992, and if you remember American political history, this is not a random set of dates, the government, renationalized Landsat and eventually gave away all the Landsat data free. So the Obama administration is very far over on the side of making data available. There's a website, data.gov. Their policy is they want everything out there. Many cities and states have done the same. When I'm teaching students databases, I give them the file of Chicago potholes as a sample database to you. It's a free, easily understandable spreadsheet. And say, here, thousands of potholes. Tell me, do a join of how many potholes there were this day with the weather that day. So more seriously, a lot of these things, there's a huge amount of urban planning now that depends on the websites at data.gov or places like it. The real problem is that it's starting to run into personal privacy, which is a different issue, Landsat. Just as an example of the Landsat imagery you might care about, this is Mount St. Helens. That's 1973 on the left, 1983 on the right. One of my colleagues at Belcour once had come from Portland, went back there and said, when you go back someplace and the mountains have changed, you know you're getting old. The people who have tried cost recovery, it didn't work very well. I think I want to move on. Okay, now, things that do work. The Sloan Sky Survey. A lot of the data in the virtual observatory comes from very large surveys. This is sort of the fourth paradigm in action. It's not an accident that Jim Gray was doing a lot of the astronomy work. The Sloan survey photographs the world in the visible spectrum. The 2-mass survey, 2-micron all-sky survey is in the infrared, in the 2 microns, infrared. There is a X-ray map that comes from one of the satellites, and they all get merged together in the virtual observatory. The costs of this are quite large. The interesting thing Jim Gray wrote is that the software actually has had more money spent on it than the telescopes. This is another Sloan project. This is the Census of Marine Life. They're looking for all the possible, they have 25 sites around the world, all coastal. They pick up the water, see what they can find in it, try to list every organism. This is the protein data bank, random protein. Now, who's actually going to keep all of this stuff? That is a real problem. Many of these archives are soft money. Even Sloan could decide to withdraw its funding and go somewhere else, although by now I think there's a copy of the Sloan survey at both Caltech and Chicago, University of Chicago. I think one or the other of them would keep going no matter what. But there used to be a service in the UK called the Arts and Humanities Data Service. And at one point, the Funding Council just withdrew all the money and said, well, we don't think this needs to be centrally funded. The universities can do it. And the universities sort of panicked. The university, King's College London, actually stepped up and took the data. But it shook everybody up who thought that, well, government funding was the best you could have. I'm a big fan of sharing these things. I don't know how many of you know what LOCKSS is. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. It's a shared operation among university libraries around the world to back each other up. I talked about that. One of the other things about open data is self-improvement. Administrator at Yale named Lemore Peel runs a social science research group. They basically pay a graduate student to check all of the spreadsheet calculations that are being presented to be sure that what the paper says matches what the data does. Lemore, it takes a few hours per paper, and Lemore says we get an awful lot of thank you notes when we catch a mistake before publication, which is not encouraging to me about universities who don't do this. But if you actually publish the data, then you're more likely to check this. You also get more attention. This is how many citations are there to papers with open data versus papers with closed data. And this says that the 48% of the cancer clinical trials which published their data got 85% of the citations. So this was an attempt to encourage academic researchers that, you can make progress in your game by publishing your data. I'm a little disappointed. This paper obviously is almost 10 years ago. It has not been followed up that much. And I don't have an answer. I just don't, there was at one point a huge mob of papers of the form. Open access papers get cited more than closed access papers. And this was open access data, but that particular argument seems to be dying down. One of the big questions is cost. I went through about 5 years ago, looking for every paper I could find that discussed how much it spent on saving its data. And I got a range of numbers. which went from basically 3% to 30%. And the problem for me is that if you're saying that saving the data from scientific research is going to cost 3% of the research, that's an affordable number. If it's going to cost 30%, you're talking about basically cutting the amount of research in the United States by a quarter to save the other 3/4. I don't think that would be possible or acceptable. So I'm hoping that we get better at building infrastructure to help people save data. At one point, Tony Hay, Microsoft, said, well, what could Microsoft do to help with scholarly data? And I said, you should publish a standard Excel spreadsheet for each science, chemistry results, biology results, physics results. They'll have to be more specialized than that, so that everybody who says, I want to put my data down in this spreadsheet will use the same columns and IDs, and will be able to do interoperability. Well, he didn't think that would work. So we're still looking for how we can do this efficiently. I think the real answers are going to be things like vocabulary management, crosswalks between different areas. It's a little strange to find that even in an area with relatively well understood labels, you'll find people representing locations in the UK with Ordnance Survey coordinates and some with latitude and longitude. I think the Ordnance Survey is being driven out by latitude and longitude, but you've got interoperability questions. We need tools for statistical comparisons. Talk about that later. We need to look at the areas where there are standard experimental machines spitting out the same kind of data and say, look, let's get everybody, all the MRI machine manufacturers to put out things that are compatible with the radiological image standards, which they now do. There's a particular problem in epidemiology. Epidemiology involves personal records. We don't do it very well. The United States used to publish death records by name of town, day, and cause of death. We now only publish them by state and year. And that, one epidemiologist said to me, means we could no longer do the study that showed that the people living downwind from the DuPont plant in Delaware were having unusually high cancer rates. The other thing which is very sad about this is that you can buy amazing numbers of health records. All the hospitals are out there selling them. Also all the insurance companies. So, you probably don't know this, but there are 2 pharmacy benefit managers. They see all the prescriptions written in the country, and they sell them to the pharmaceutical companies, but not to the epidemiologists who can't afford them. I'm going to skip over this. Now, one answer is to use individual collaborative projects. There are many projects in which a lot of individuals are being asked to help contribute. The best known one is Galaxy Zoo. Some astronomers asked volunteers to look at pictures of galaxies and say whether they were spiral galaxies, globular clusters, whatever. And there was a remarkable outcome. There's this strange green frog, Kermit in space, showed up. It was found by that Dutch school teacher, and nobody still knows. That was at least 6 years ago. Nobody knows what it is. They have found something else weird, though. This is not the only thing now found. But this came as an accidental byproduct of having thousands of people looking at pictures of galaxies. Here are 2 more. This guy hikes the same trail every day near Phoenix, has done it for decades, writes down what each of the plants is doing, so that if you want to do climate change studies, you can say, when did this leaf out this year compared to last year? The woman on the right has sent 1,300 bird censuses into the eBird database. Now, I should say this doesn't always work. The Appalachian Mountain Club runs a network of trails in New Hampshire, and they wanted to do phenology. So they started giving hikers little cards with pictures of a plant and instructions to write down whether this plant was in bud, in flower, in leaf, or bare stems. What they got back was useless because they discovered that the average hiker didn't seem to have a clue where they were. So they now hide inconspicuous little cameras set to take one picture every day near the plants they're monitoring. By the way, they continued to give out the cards because it got people interested in the environment, so that was a good thing. The longest running amateur database are probably the bird watchers. And there's a project called Feeder Watch, run out of Cornell, and there's a stream of papers about ornithology and, of course, about environmental aspects that come out of Feeder Watch. So some of the things we don't know. To do scientific data, open data, you need to know something about principles of archiving, like how do you describe things and explain them to people who are not experts. You need to know something about information technology, and you need to know about the science underneath. How do you teach one person the same thing, other people the other things? At Syracuse, they tell me we teach our students all three things. At Rutgers, we think we're teaching archivists, and we tell them to collaborate with a scientist and an IT person. The Syracuse people say there's lots of institutions that will hire one person but not three. We say, yeah, but you'll get the job done better if each person only does part of it. So we'll find out. We also don't know, curiously, is open data management something you will do at the beginning of your career, the end of your career, or the whole career? I don't know yet. At the moment, it's mostly at the end. It's people who are retiring and want to see their data don't get thrown out. Now, let me get back to Ron Wasvert, who is helping ACM with its problem, which is, okay, one way of doing this sharing is to get people to publish their code and their data. And the problem that I have when I think about this is the allocation of the effort. Okay, so what ACM would like to do is take the art, I assume everybody here has used the ACM digital library, but to add to the papers data and code where appropriate. ACM actually does this in a number of places. How do you check that it's right? And I looked at this and said, that's going to be a real burden on the referees, that ACM is going to have to lean on the authors to do more to make the data publicly compatible. Turns out ACM has been pretty good at getting volunteers to do it. I was surprised. Also, a big thing is that they don't make it compulsory at the moment that you volunteer for this. And in fact, one of the big issues, where was I? Is ACM gives out a badge if your paper contains validated code or data. And we need to get this badge recognized as more valuable by the universities. Haven't done that yet. You know, it doesn't show up on your H-index. So we're working on that one. Why do we want to do this? We want to avoid, computer science has fewer retracted papers, but it does have some. We'd like to eliminate that. We'd like to give users code they can run. There is a huge wave at the moment of R and Python. So hopefully if people distributed in that form will be able to get them. The other thing is ACM doesn't want to be run over by other people. There are other publishers like Elsevier who want to do repositories. Every university has one. We don't yet know how this is going to work. Really need to end up. Here are some of the ACM conferences that already do refereeing of attachments. Some of them are actually fairly insistent. Others do these optionally. There have been obvious problems where the original author had some special purpose software or equipment that the referee doesn't have, and that's being negotiated. Here are the data on SIGMOD. They tried to review 78 papers in 2008. Sorry, they offered it to 78 papers, 54 papers tried, 44 worked. One of the questions is whether people want to deposit software are sort of moving to GitHub and leaving ACM. We'll try to find out. As I said, I was surprised that the effort showed up. I expected there to be arguments of the form, the author isn't willing to take the time to make the code portable versus the referee isn't willing to take the time to get the code working. Apparently, this has generally worked out. The difficulties that come up have to do with intellectual property and resources, software capture. Now, I'm assuming that everyone here knows this particular chart about standards and why it's not easy just to say there should be a standard way of describing software. But let me end up with the question is, well, what are we going to do? People are beginning to understand that the data behind the paper is important. There's more and more pressure for open data from several government agencies. It doesn't work as well as I would think. At the last iConference, there was someone from UCLA talking about ethnographic observations of how scientific groups were dealing with the NSF data management requirement. And the summary of the paper was, everybody's writing paper, no one's doing anything. So we have a lot of data management plans, we don't have much data. But the same thing happened with the NIH article open access. Originally, they announced it as a requirement. Not many people did it. Then PubMed Central went to work on, okay, we'll store this. We'll negotiate with the publishers. We'll get all this stuff. And then finally, after PubMed Central had made it easy to deposit, NIH has started saying, if you don't deposit, you won't get another grant. And boy, does that produce compliance. So we still don't have an answer. Now, what would I want to do next? And this is the last slide. So I'm a techie. So I'm not saying that I'm going to go organize the data equivalent of PubMed Central, even though it might be a good idea. We need methodologies for data cleaning. There's a lot of bad data out there. I have my own favorite project, which no one is willing to work with me on yet, which is take a large database, imagine a big spreadsheet, cover up one data item, and predict it from all the rest of the spreadsheet. If you get the right answer, if you get the answer that you covered up, fine. If you didn't, it's either a mistake or it's interesting. 99% of the time it's a mistake, but you ought to at least flag it and know that there's an outlier here. We need crosswalks. The data manual standards for seismic data and geography both run over 200 pages. I doubt that many people have read both of them, and yet you would obviously think that they are closely related areas. Same thing happens in biology versus medicine. So I think we need some development on how we get the vocabulary standardized so that people can really run cross-disciplinary data mining. We need to know if knowledge management is valuable. There has been, for 10 years, discussion of Web 2.0, and we have to rewrite all the facts in the world into relational triples. I don't know if this is worth anything. Dave Parnas said decades ago that a database was something that worked and a knowledge base was something that didn't work. But people keep saying, no, 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 the next knowledge base is going to work. And maybe it will, news story a couple of days ago, a computer program has finally beaten a champion Go player. Computer beat the world chess champion 20 years ago. Go had remained much more difficult. Somebody's finally done it. So there is progress in the world. And then I'd like to understand how we sweep data out of short-term repositories and put them into long-term ones. The Internet Archive doesn't want to do this. The Internet Archive says our goal is to capture human creativity, not censors. But they have a methodology they run around the web sweeping things up and putting them into somehow a common format. Their database, by the way, is basically a long series of text lines which are searched with either binary search or grep. But they do it. So something like that is needed for other sciences. Go around the university repositories, pick up all the data. Okay, so I've run over time, but no, I wanted more time for questions. What do people have questions? I basically can't see, so I don't know if anybody has a question. No?
Hello.
Yes.
This is more of a comment than a question. Frankly, I'm baffled. I'm baffled by your presentation, okay?
Yep.
You started off with these examples of the cat, okay, and plagiarism, which seems like there are problems which are self-evident by looking at the publications themselves without any other sort of ancillary data sharing. And as a scientist, I mean, we're data sharing all the time. Our publications are the way that we share the data. You can't publish a scientific paper in a scientific field without data in there. And furthermore, the example of the Fleming and penicillin, I don't think any scientist would call that data sharing. That's preserving a sample. The data, which is what was in Fleming's notebook or notes, misidentifying the organism, that wasn't what was shared. It was the actual organism that was shared. That's a whole separate issue other than data sharing.
Okay, so there's two separate questions here. One is the current publication system sharing enough of the data? And in many fields, people say, no, it's not, because what gets published is a summary and they want to see the original data. The area where this is hottest is drug clinical trials, where a lot of people think that the pharmaceutical companies should make public all of the data on the trial, particularly so that people can data mine it for secondary side effects. So there are a lot of people who would say, no, the publication isn't enough. Now, the second question as to physical samples versus numerical data. Increasingly, what had been samples are becoming digital representations of one sort or another. So what I think I see overwhelmingly is that the physical samples are sitting in a vault somewhere, and what everybody is using is a representation. The history of digitizing things is, first people say, the only thing I'm going to do with digital versions of whatever, to start with it was books, is I'm going to use your search system to find the ones I'm actually going to go and visit myself. Then they start saying, no, I can actually do work remotely. And then they say, I don't even need to look remotely, a computer can. So I'll tell you another story, which is, this is from Tim Rowe at UT Austin. He does the National vertebrate, fossil vertebrate database. He does 3D models of fossils. And he told me that the way he works is he starts off with, okay, I'm going to do rabbits. You know, he's going through the file, the animal kingdom phylum by phylum. He says, okay, I'm going to do rabbits. Who has the best collection of fossil rabbits in the US? Calls the guy up who says, no, I want the scholars to have to come visit me. I don't want you to scan my rabbits. So then I call the guy with the second best collection, who's been trying for a decade to get a leg up. And he says, what the hell, I'll try it. And I scan the second best collection, put it online. 6 months later, the other guy calls me back because everybody is now visiting him. So I think there's a change there. Okay. Oh, I see, we should alternate slides.
Going back to the first part of your talk with the pessimistic studies of trying to show cause and effect, I wonder if you've considered the case of the overhead transmission power lines that was in the news quite a bit about 20 years ago, where it seemed like each study would find that overhead transmission lines caused a rare number of cancers to exist, but then each study found a different set of rare cancers. And it seems like if you just look at enough rare cancers, for sure you'll find some that statistically will be above average.
Yes, there have been a lot. That's another case of people didn't know enough about statistics. And they didn't realize how many cancer clusters there are in the country simply at random. I think that everything about cell phones and overhead transmission lines has been dismissed for the moment. But there is somebody on Etsy selling handmade tinfoil hats, so I don't know. But yes, I think that's another case of lack of statistics knowledge.
So I have a question inspired by a story. I have this hobby that whenever I order something from China, I looked up on Google, you know, where it came from. And I noticed that the actual roads on the maps are offset from the satellite images. And I thought, oh, that's strange. But recently I found that there was a reason for that, and the reason is that the Chinese government maintains maps in their own, for national security reasons, they offset their coordinate system from the GPS coordinate system. And there are two ways to deal with that. One is that people sort of reverse engineered that and found what the offset is. The other one is they just simply ignored Chinese maps, and there is an OpenStreetMap map of China that does not have this problem. So my question is, there's the old data, a lot of it is like really, not maintained probably, not curated, has very strange assumptions baked into it, and sometimes, may be worthless because no one knows what the assumptions really were. So, is it worth trying to reverse engineer old data, or should we just start from scratch and,
Okay, so sometimes you should start, if you can measure it again, you should start from scratch. But there's a really hard problem, which is there probably is data that isn't worth anything. And how do we identify it? I mean, we don't have the resources to save absolutely everything. And I don't know how eventually you make the decisions about this is worth saving versus that which isn't. Although the Chinese problem is different, that someone is deliberately distorting it, and there's lots of that. I mean, at one point, I was listening to a talk by somebody from the University of Minnesota whose research was to take aerial photography, satellite photography of farms and train a machine learning program for agricultural yield using data from places like the US and Western Europe, where the statistics the government publishes are valid. And his interest was in measuring agricultural yields in places in Africa where nobody has any statistics. But one of the odd things he said in the talk was, by the way, he said, everything the North Koreans publish about their agricultural productivity is nonsense. And so there's a problem about deliberately distorted data, which is going to be very hard in an open data world to stick with. But then there's the problem of, do we do absolutely everything, or do we forget some things? You have to ask whether it can be done again. If somehow we forgot the boiling point of acetone, we could measure it again. If we completely forgot what the temperature was yesterday morning, We can't reset the world yesterday morning. Yeah.
So it's not quite open data, it's the question about open access of just the papers themselves. And you mentioned that there are places where you would get a $30,000 bonus for every Nature paper, as opposed to other places where if you publish in Nature and you want open access, you actually get a $5,000 penalty for that extra fee. Is that something that, like, an institution should address sort of more like overheadish as opposed to?
Yeah, the relations between libraries and publishers are, if anything, I would say the commercial publishers going downhill. Berkeley has had a very well-publicized fight with the Nature Publishing Group over subscription rates. My belief is that in the long run, the highly expensive competitive journals are likely to disappear. Nature Science, Lancet, PNAS are probably safe, though current generation will last long enough. But there are a lot of very expensive journals where the way I usually say it is, as soon as Harvard or Stanford will give somebody tenure for something that was only published open access on the web, half the expensive journals in the world will be gone soon. One of the problems is that there's now a rash of open access journals that don't referee at all. And so we need to, somehow the publishing community and the university community have to get their act together. I don't actually see how that's going to happen right now, except by bankruptcies in publishing.
I have a question about publication and the review process. So imagine that you came across 10 papers from different researchers in a really hot area, really novel and impactful research, and you see an opportunity for a postdoc to expand on that. So you get the postdoc, and they discover that the results aren't reproducible and that the community was ignoring a source of uncertainty that would make their results not significant. So how do you go about publishing something like that among publishers who want novelty and the pushback that you might get from that?
That's a very serious problem. There is a journal of negative results in biomedicine, but there was recently a very sharp example of this. Somebody actually published a paper claiming that ESP was real. And two different people repeated the experiment, got the other answer, and couldn't find a journal that would publish it because the journals weren't interested in a purely negative paper. Somehow we have to raise the threshold here of what people are willing to, we have to recognize the need for the negative work. I once tried suggesting to somebody at NIH that they should put aside 1% of the research budget for replications. And they didn't want to do it. And there are obviously political questions here. I also once was talking to somebody who now deceased, unfortunately, statistician at NIH who said, I don't want you getting all of the crap out of literature because I'm able to evaluate it as crap, but I like to see the ideas. So, hard problem. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you.